Any discussion here at the National Energy Summit will eventually involve renewable energy. Joining me now to discuss one aspect is Mark Pinto. He is Chief Technology Officer for Applied Materials in California. Mark, it's good to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Your division specifically deals with efficiency and solar. Let's start with solar, and your focus is on PV right now.
Right.
Is the situation ramping up a little bit in terms of demand? Because there was a supply glut, it seemed, for quite some time.
Yeah, there was a supply glut starting last fall, mainly created in Spain. So the Spanish government put in a program to incentivize solar, probably copied it a little bit too exactly off of Germany, which has twice the sunlight of Spain. The other thing I think, apart from the economy, that they didn't count on was in Germany, the solar rolled out mostly through residential rooftops, fairly slow. Spain, a lot the opposite, mostly through utility scale, about 70% maybe. And so very quickly they piled up a large installation base. So that, together with the high feed-in tariff and together with the economic problem, a little bit of over-installation. That's coming down. However, even in Europe, Italy is growing incredibly fast this year. Germany is actually still growing very fast, as well as France also now is picking up quite a bit. But globally, probably the biggest market right now is really changing rapidly is the Chinese market. So,
which has the largest solar field planned, at least.
Correct, but China has been growing as a manufacturer of solar, maybe 40% of manufacturing of solar panels last year, but almost no consumption up until about 6 months ago, and that is changing unbelievably fast.
When you refer, Mark, to Spain and Germany, do you look to those as clear models and where you can divine some lessons learned and what we could be facing in the U.S., or are these examples just too different in structure?
No, I think they're good examples. I think that the German example, one can debate. Obviously they're not the most sun-rich country in the world. But if you look at how they set the feed-in tariff itself is a very simple mechanism that you can control independent of how complicated you have the utility structure that you have. It's a very simple mechanism, and you can tie it to the cost of solar. As the cost of solar comes down, you can adjust. It's one parameter you can adjust. The Spanish situation, I think, teaches the lesson that you got to get it right. The Germans got kind of the right number. Spain, maybe it was a little bit too high.
Now, is this getting it right technically or through
economically?
regulation?
Economically. What is the right level of feed-in tariff and incentive to encourage the right pace of installation?
Let's talk about the incentives that are in place here in the U.S., Mark. And this has been a series of problems and a real flashpoint for consternation of Congress from your industry with the investment tax credit. It seems to be a major change given the legislation enacted last fall, TARP funding, which included an 8-year renewal of the ITC. But you were telling me a moment ago that there are one or two kinks in that plan as you see it.
So, the U.S., rather than using this feed-in tariff, you get this investment tax credit off the purchase of your solar asset. A couple problems with that. One is that it's a tax credit, so there's been discussion and some work on trying to make it, because a lot of companies who would start may not have profits to take the tax credit.
Right, as long as you're making money, it works, but in a global recession, it does not.
So that's one, but the bigger issue was also there was an intent with the extension to, and it was written to allow the ITC to be used by utilities, which it had not been before. And really, we believe utility ownership is critical to the adoption of solar in the U.S. because it allows better management of the solar assets within the grid. It allows lower costs to be delivered as well. The problem was that there's pre-existing tax code that does not allow the utilities to immediately take that credit. So they have to basically amortize it over a life of the asset, which totally destroys the economics of the credit and the intent of the credit. Just to put that in perspective, people I don't think, recognize how important the economics or financing of solar is. If a utility wants to build a solar factory, and assuming they could even take the investment tax credit, and assuming they take a normal rate of return on their capital, maybe 9%, We think today the cost of electricity in California to do that's about 15 cents. Not bad.
Per kilowatt hour.
Yeah, very competitive with peaking electricity, not yet at base.
Right.
Which it doesn't need to be, by the way, for solar. If instead they could use borrowed money at 2% interest, the cost of the solar electricity would be 9 cents. It's a huge difference.
That's almost cut in half.
Right. So financing, how the tax credit is applied, makes a huge difference, because with solar there's no fuel. You're buying the asset, you put it in the ground, it lasts 20 years. So it's all about the interest rate. It's all about those tax credits, in our case in the U.S., and how they're handled makes all the difference in the economics.
But there have been some rumblings lately, Mark, that I've heard that the maintenance cost of solar arrays have been underestimated so far.
I don't think so. Now, don't forget there are different kinds of solar. So there's the solar thermal, the big mirrors.
It does depend on what you're using.
Right, and the solar photovoltaics. The solar photovoltaics do not have a significant maintenance cost. Essentially, in fact, in some environments, just the rain with the particular kinds of glass can just self-clean it. So no, I think the solar thermal and some of the concentrating solar are a little bit more difficult because they really depend on not having any dust or defects and very direct sunlight. There are other technologies like thin film technologies that are much more less sensitive to, say, clouds and diffuse sunlight. No, it very much depends on the technology.
Mark, final question. I want to get away from solar and get into energy efficiency, which is the other part of your division with Applied. There is such an emphasis right now in the U.S. on efficiency. It's brought up time and time again. Secretary Chu calls it one of his favorite subjects because it's so easy to achieve. What's the application as you see it for better efficiency?
So, a few different things. One that we've been working on for some time is energy efficient glass. So most glass now in the United States is coated so that it tries to, in direct sunlight, keep the heat from coming in but allow the light to come in.
The R factor.
Right. So then you're able to cut your air conditioning bill, for instance. That's a passive coating. What we're looking at going forward are so-called maybe smarter glass, where for instance, two examples. One where you would have an ability to electrically tint the glass. So based on how much sunlight is coming in, you can adjust the shading to allow the optimal amount of light and keep the heat down. So that's one technology. Another one is what's called building integrated photovoltaics, or BIPV. Many forms of this, but one form is to embed the solar in the window itself. So you get both a shading, but also the light that hits the shading part gets turned into electricity. Basically, again, offsetting your air conditioning bill. These are great ideas. The key to all of them is driving down the cost. They work in principle. In fact, there are demonstrations. The Department of Energy has some of these electrochromic windows. You can find some BIPV in Manhattan, but it's way too expensive today. We've got to drive down the cost. The other big one is solid-state lighting. This is a great challenge. The technology is already used today. It's in your cell phone. It's in braking lights in cars. Why is it in the cell phone? Because it's really bright, and it's also very good on battery life. But as a light bulb, it's still too expensive for home use. And so again, we want to drive down the cost through technology. Can save many times over the cost of even a fluorescent bulb, and with no mercury, and with a longer lifetime.
So much comes down to cost. Mark Pinto is Chief Technology Officer with Applied Materials, who's in for the National Energy Summit from California. Mark, enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you very much.